In this video, we're going to take a look at a student's piece of code. We're going to try and fix some of the problems they're having in here, kind of add some other ideas that they might try and incorporate. So on the left-hand side is a version that I've started to play around with and modify. On the right-hand side is the original that they sent me. So what they've sent me, as you click Add Person, you get these boxes that show up where you can enter a name. So I could put Student 1, Student 2, Student 3, Student 4. Once I hit Edit, it puts them in, and their Edit button disappears. It currently just randomly generates the height of these bars, and it randomly generates the colors, I believe. Mine's slightly different. As I click Add a Person, and I hit Edit, notice my Edit button kind of stays, so I can, what I can do is if I put Student 1, Student 2, Student 3, Student 4, 5, notice when I click Edit, the Add Person button is no longer accessible. You can only do that under the Edit command. Also notice that I can modify the names. So those are two of the changes I've added. Another change I've added, and I have to restart it to show this, but if I add a couple names here, and this is the original, there's the modification, and I add a couple names here, the habit that people use is if I want to move through, if I was using this as a user, I'd hit Student 1 Tab, and then I'd want to go to Student 2, Tab Student 3, Tab Student 4, Tab. Tab is kind of that button that we've all grown to accustomed to using. In this version, if I hit Tab, I get this kind of funny behavior, and if I hit Tab again, I actually then cycle down to the bottom one. The reason this is happening is because even though we've put a J label right on top of the button still exists. So when I hit Tab, it's actually cycling to the button underneath. So notice it still works, but what I've done in my version is I've actually made it such that the J buttons aren't accessible with the Tab. So the Tab moves between the labels. So we're going to kind of talk about what we did to kind of tweak this a little bit. So RGB1 is the original, and RGB is my modified version. So let's start by talking about, one last thing that I did here was, and this is a little thing, drag them in, is the student added a bar here to represent kind of the border, and notice how their red lines cut through it. I made a little tweak so that the red lines end here. I think that's a little bit of a cleaner look. And it's important to think about these design features. We're obviously interested in coding here and developing an understanding of programming, but you always want to keep design in the back of your head. And I'm saying this as someone that doesn't excel in design, to be quite honest. But it is something you want to be cognizant of. Okay, let's take a look at what happened here. So the first thing we did here, if we scroll up to the top, so this is their action listener. They called it ED for the edit button. So the first thing we did was initially in the original one, and let's see if we can split screen these. It's not going to be great split screen, but we can get a little bit of an idea of what this looks like. If we take a look at the top of theirs, so this is their ED. So see here, public, this is not going to be ideal, but that's okay, we'll keep trying. If I scroll over, here's my action listener ED. Here's my action listener ED, so notice we're in the same place now. So what they did in their code was they just had a simple, when you press the edit button, because the ED is the listener attached to the edit button, they simply loop through and they do a couple of things. First is they edit names, they get the name, they set the visible to false. So essentially edit names is the array list of JText fields, and they basically hide them, and then they take each button, people is the array list of buttons, and they set the text to whatever the name is currently in the list. And then they set the edit button to false. That's why the edit button disappears. What I've done here is I've added an integer called eCount, and essentially if eCount mod 2 is equivalent to 0, I do the exact same code that they had. Else what I do is if I hit edit again, it sets the edits names to visible again. So essentially, if I run this, here's the original. I'm just going to kind of slide it below here. There it is. When I click edit, what's going to happen is it's going to enter into this section here, and it's going to add person. So I put 1, 2, 3. I hit edit, and essentially what it does is it takes the name in the JText field and then assigns it to the button. So I hit edit, and then my button disappears. Make sense? On mine, what I do is I add a couple person. I go 1, 2. Let's add another person. 3. If I hit edit now, what happens is currently e counts 0, so 0 mod 2 is 0, and I enter this section here. So I take whatever's in the JText field and I place it on the button, and then I make the set enable for add person to false, because I don't want to be able to add a person when I'm not in edit mode. I can only add people when I'm in edit mode. So now if I hit edit again, it's going to come back in here, but at the bottom I increment e count. By incrementing e count, it means that this e count mod 2 is not going to be equal to 0, and so I'm going to come down here. And so what I do now is I essentially I make all my JText fields visible again, and then I take whatever name is currently in the button and put it in the text field. So I hit edit again, and they're visible. So I put 1 student, and I hit edit again, or something like student. See how that works? This line here is critical, because if I run this, let's kill all these, and let's run this again, and we're going to bring the original over here, we'll bring the modified version here. If I take out, I commented out this line, if I put, student 1, student 2, I hit edit, that's great. I hit edit again. Oh, look at that, it pulls it in there. Well, that makes sense because it's already stored JText, it's already stored there. So this line is actually extra. Anyways, I'm not going to change this video, just so you see it. I make mistakes too. I make all sorts of little mistakes. So, get that idea here? So again, if we want to tie this back to what we're learning in class about objects and classes, we have these objects which are buttons, and we have these objects which are labels, and we're using their get and set fields to pass things back and forth. So the last thing I want to kind of talk about here is this whole idea of the tabbing bit. So again, let me highlight what the tabbing issue was. And this is, again, we want to think about how people are going to use this. If I'm in this program and I'm going to add a person here, like my name, and I'm going to hit tab, I don't want this to happen. I want it to move to the next box. So if I do this here, I type in something, I hit tab, it does. What's happening is, even though you're putting your JText fields on top of your JButtons, the JButtons are still active. So when I hit tab, what it does is it moves to the JButton, so it gets priority and basically hides the JText field. So what I need to do is, when I create the buttons, I essentially want to make it such that I can't focus my cursor on them. So this is a section in the student's code where they, let's kill everything, where they actually create the buttons essentially. So what I've done in here is, if I come down to this section, I essentially use this method called setFocusable. SetFocusable is what controls whether or not excuse me, whether or not that button will respond to a tab. So if when I create each button, I've set focusable to false, I can't tab into there, which is a nice little add-on there. So something to think about. The last thing I'll say before closing is, you notice this, I think you already saw it, this funny thing where if I hover over the button, the line disappears. If I add some people, this has to do with how this display is being rendered. So I would suggest, as something to kind of explore, is either maybe cut off where your window frame's being rendered, and maybe a toolbar along the top, so add person edit, or you have to figure out how to design it such that the button is being put on top of your painting, because essentially your button's on this panel and then you're painting over it. So on that note, I'm going to leave you to try that. I hope that helped, and as always, feel free to ask any questions, and even if this isn't your program, play around with it and feel free to post any comments or questions. Have a great day.